Well, welcome. Glad everybody's here. I'm going to start off slow so people keep coming in because I know there's a lot of food. People are piling up their plates. Hey, hey, Bob.
Bob.
Hey, Bob.
Hey.
Come sit down.
Hi, Dee.
Hi. I might have to scoot out, sit over
fine.
here because I'm supposed to help clean up later.
Oh, okay.
So. Scoot
Well,
out
I
from
just,
here, not be rude.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
I just wanted to start by putting up, a brief timeline of what we've been talking about and where we'll end up going today. Even though I said this is the first 400 years, I've been treating it like it's the first 1400 years. But yeah, 1000 BC is the date the church uses when David becomes king of the 12 tribes. David and Solomon keep the kingdom together. Solomon's sons, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, they can't make peace with each other, so the 10 tribes follow Jeroboam up to Mount Gerizim, which is where the Samaritans are going to worship in the time of Jesus. And they worship there throughout the time of being known as the nation of Israel. And Judah and Benjamin and Jerusalem remain the southern kingdom under the rule of Rehoboam. Assyria invades the northern kingdom sometime around 710. Babylonians destroy Jerusalem in 2 trips, 594 and then again in 587. And they come back to take whatever else is there. In 320, Alexander the Great decides to invade the Middle East. In 175, it's Antiochus Epiphanes, become the grandson of Alexander the Great. He rules Judea at that point in time for the Greeks. Judas Maccabeus leads a successful revolt in 167, and that's what is celebrated at Hanukkah. They retake the temple, and they are allowed to have their own set of priests, even though, the political leadership of Judea is sketchy at best. In 64 BC, Pompey brings the first Roman troops to the Middle East. Mark Antony names Herod the Great the Tetrarch of Judea, and he rules for 37 years. He dies in 4 BC, the same year that Jesus is probably born. Jerusalem is ruled briefly by his son Herod Antipater. Galilee and Judea are ruled by Herod Antipas, and Nabotea by their brother Philip. Antipater is really a bad leader, and he's called back to Rome, and nobody ever hears from him again. And then there are a series of governors from Rome. Pontius Pilate arrives in 26 AD. I think he's the 3rd governor from Rome to arrive in Jerusalem. Jesus dies. We're still not exactly sure. 29, 31, 32 AD. They all work on the Jewish calendar and the Roman calendar as days when Good Friday could have fallen on the day of Passover. Paul writes his first letter. I meant to change that. It's not 2 Corinthians. It's 1 Thessalonians was his first letter, 54 AD. Gospel dates are roughly there, from 60 to maybe close to 100 AD. The 4 Gospels completed. The Roman Jewish War, 66 to 73 AD. That's where we're going to start. That's a war that is sadly forgotten by the way we educate our children and youth. 66-73, the Roman-Jewish War, one of the most important ancient wars, changed the world forever. And we don't teach this in schools because we're afraid it'll be too religious. But it's a very important date in the life of the Western world. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Simon Bar Kokhba, he leads the last Jewish rebellion in 132. He's killed in 136. And then 306 to 337, Constantine becomes the emperor in Rome. He does not make Christianity the official religion of Rome. Again, media gives you some bad information. Constantine never made Christianity the official language of the empire. He did, in 312, make it legal. You wouldn't be arrested for being a Christian in 312. And he did call together the Council of Nicaea in 325, which came up with our Nicene Creed. Yeah. It's Theodosius in 380 who declares all Roman subjects must profess the Nicene Creed. Even if you're not Christian, you're gonna recite the Nicene Creed. And that's when Christianity is now the official religion of the empire. Jews are allowed to carry on their own faith in Rome. They weren't considered a threat, but all other pagans had to become Christian. And then briefly in the 6th century, an emperor named Julian decided he wanted to take Rome back and become pagan again. And he ruled for about 10 or 12 years, which were very messy, and eventually his efforts failed. Paganism did not come back, despite his best efforts. So leading up to the war, the Jewish-Roman War, in 38 AD, Caligula installed his statue. This being Caligula here, young man. He's if he's not famous, he's infamous. Caligula was a very eccentric leader. Let's say that. You'll hear trivia questions talk about how he named his horse a general in his army. Well, that's not true. That's just legend. But he did probably love his horse more than he loved other people. Okay. In 54, this is Nero. Very contemporary beard he's got there. Nero was having all kinds of trouble keeping Romans underfoot. And so sometime in the 60s, he began to blame Christians for the Roman riots and the fires that were being set all over Rome and all over cities up and down the Roman Empire. He at least executed dozens of Christians, and we at least hold the possibility that Peter and Paul may have been among those who were executed under Nero's leadership. Whether Nero knew who was being executed is another question entirely, and most likely he didn't. Most likely he just issued a decree and let his underlings figure out who they were going to kill. In 66 AD, the Emperor Flavian had enough of all the Jewish revolts. Obviously, when Caligula put his statue in synagogues, Jews didn't think that was right. And they started a series of protests. We talked earlier about the Sicarii, who were going around trying to assassinate people, high officials, as a way to get the Romans to go home. it's not unlike, it's not unlike, Iran, who's put a bounty on American diplomats and different American people to be assassinated in the last 5 years. John Bolton was, very disturbed that they were only offering something like $400,000 for killing him. He said, "I'm worth more than that." At any rate, that kind of violence was going on in the Roman Empire. Their answer was to begin to attack Jerusalem, which was failing miserably. So they started under the general Vespasian. He started building these siege engines, which rose up to 3 stories high and made a ramp so that the Roman soldiers could climb up, could run up the ramp and over the wall and defeat Jerusalem. It took them 3 years to build enough engines to attack Jerusalem this way. Vespasian was called away from his role in the Middle East in 69, and Vespasian went to Rome and became the emperor, and he left his son Titus in charge of the army, and he finished the engines, and they got into Jerusalem. This is the etching that's on the Ark of Triumph in Rome to this day, and there you see the menorah that they took out of the temple. The Romans were very disappointed when they finally got into the temple, because they thought the place should be loaded with gold. They knew what a temple looked like. There's statues, there's gold everywhere, there's all these riches and treasures. And the Romans got in there and they said, "There's nothing here. It's the Holy of Holies. There's a couple of candlesticks. That's all there is." They were very disappointed. So the plunder, showing the plunder from Jerusalem back to Rome, the best they can do is a menorah. Basically, Titus destroyed Jerusalem down to the ground. We've seen it. We know what Gaza looks like today. That's what Jerusalem looked like in 69, 70 AD. It was down to the ground. Jesus said there won't be one brick left upon another. He was right. He was right. The Jews run away from Jerusalem in 70 AD, and eventually they take shelter in a fortress built by Herod the Great at Masada, 73 AD. It takes them another 3 years to lay bare the fortress at Masada. So here's Jerusalem. A number of Jews and all the remaining Christian community, they go across the Jordan River to a town called Pella, where they've got a high place where they can look at their enemies coming at them. And so they seek shelter in Pella in trying to escape the Roman soldiers who were trying basically to round up all the rebels. The majority of Jews go to Masada, and this is the fortress here. And what you have to know is when the Jews got up there, they got up there by scaling the cliffs. This did not exist. This road did not exist. The Romans took 3 years to bring sand up out of the desert. They don't have bulldozers, they don't have cranes. It took them 3 years to get enough sand to build a road up to the walls of Masada. When the Romans finally get their road built and the soldiers go up and over the walls, they enter the fortress, and everybody inside the fortress is dead. They have all committed suicide. Rather die than be killed by the Romans. I'm here to tell you, you think you can negotiate with these people? Think again. Think again.
Is that how that looks today?
That's how it looks today. You can go there today. You can go see Masada. You can walk around the streets that Herod laid out.
You can go up on a cable car, I heard.
Probably. I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the top tourist destinations. I don't think there's probably any tourist destinations today at this moment, but tourism is probably suffering greatly. But yeah, most of the time you can go up there and see Masada.
Walk around.
Walk around, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, again, I think this was sadly one of the most mistaken, untold stories of history that our children never learn, I'm afraid. I do want to go back just for a minute and say when the Romans finally declared victory in 73 AD. Vespasian was still the emperor in Rome. Remember, he was the general when the war began. And Vespasian, as his last gesture to the Jewish people, he renamed to the whole region. It would never again, in Roman language, be known as the land of the Jews, Judea. It would never again be known as Judea. He named it Philistia, which in English translates as Palestine. He named the area after Israel's archenemies, who aren't around in 73 AD. He named it after the Philistines. And so, you know, we have all these people arguing about who's the imperialist. Well, when you put on a Palestinian hood, you are showing yourself as a servant of the original imperialists, the Romans. The Romans, who named the whole place, and we've been calling it Palestine ever since. True Zionists will close their ears if they hear you say Palestine. Bar Kokhba went up to what's now known as the Golan Heights. And he regathered an army up in the Golan Heights of Syria in a village known as Beitar. He built a fortress for resistance. He led a small army that tried to revolt against the Roman army. And for 4 years they fought from 132 to 136, but they killed Bar Kokhba in 136, and his army scattered. And that was what was known as the last holdout, the last rebellion against the Romans by the Jewish people. So, one of the factors that led to the growth of the Christian church was the end of the temple. It was the end of Jerusalem. It was the end of peace and prosperity of any sort in the region of Judea. And Christians went off to Pella. Jews scattered even more than they had already scattered. And Jerusalem lay in ruins for centuries. Christians then started to gather in, first of all, in house churches. And this is one that is recently excavated. We can date it to the mid-200s. And the book of Acts says, with great power the apostles gave their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and with great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as owned lands or houses sold them, brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as had any need. To each as had any need. Karl Marx thinks this is the only 3 verses in the Bible worth reading at all. Yeah. Marx thinks the Bible is a bunch of junk, but these 3 verses? I don't know how long this lasted there, but certainly it was part of the community ethos, if you will, that we're going to take care of one another, that we're going to worship in homes. We talked about that sign of the fish that people use to identify themselves. I think it was Stuart was reminding me last time that you might walk up to somebody and you would draw this.
Right.
And if that person was a Christian, that person would draw this. And then you guys could talk. But if the other person didn't draw the other half,
Forget it.
see you later. Yeah. So this is how the early Christian community began to grow, with these house churches. And in these places, as I've said before, they were informal. So women and men sat beside each other. Everybody sat in one great circle together. Men, women, children. It didn't matter. Nobody was kept out for any reason. So Paul can say, there's neither Greek nor Jew. We'll speak the language we need to speak based on who the crowd is here. And slave nor free. In this place, we're all free, brother. We're all free, sister. In this place, there wasn't a distinction made between male and female. Everybody sat together. So when Paul famously writes, women should keep their mouths shut in church. What Paul is saying is that women, before this, Jewish women sat in the back. They couldn't even hear what was going on there. We had no form of magnification. And so they often didn't even hear what was going on in the front. So they sat together and they talked together and well, what's he saying now? And it's time to pray the Kaddish, and then get down and now they're sitting in the front row because there's only like 2 or 3 rows, and they're sitting next to their husband. And so now, as the service is going on, they're still kind of leaning over and whispering to their husband, saying, "So what does that mean? What are we doing here? What's going on now? Explain this to me." And Paul says, if you got questions, wait till after the service. Talk to your husband, he'll explain it to you, and then you'll be able to participate better the next time. And he's not telling women to be quiet forever, though unfortunately, that's the way the bureaucratic church interpreted that. He's trying to say, during worship, let's keep our voices down so everybody can hear. Seems a reasonable request. This is an early mosaic done showing Paul with Phoebe, the leader, one of the leaders, if not the prime leader of the church in Rome. Very interesting mosaic. The Catholic Church is going to say that Peter was the first bishop of Rome. I don't think that's very historic. I actually think Phoebe is probably the first bishop of Rome. But that ain't gonna fly. Notice that she's adorned in riches. Again, the idea that all early Christians were poor. No, not really. They came from all walks of life, period. Here's an early church directory done around 300 AD. This is Galla Placida and her 2 children, and the portrait is done in gold leaf. Whoa, that's one heck of a directory. That would set us back a pretty penny. Yeah, gold leaf painted on glass. But yeah, all to say that when it says, rich and poor, they meant it, rich and poor. Male and female.
Where is that now? Do you know?
This is now in a museum in Istanbul. Yes. Where Christianity, Istanbul was once the beating heart of Christianity. Now, nobody's been baptized in Turkey since 1902.
Oh, boy.
It's forbidden. Can't be baptized. You can still go to church, especially if you're a tourist, but there's no real life of the Christian church. So a few Roman emperors were famous for persecuting Christians. The Romans thought that Christians were a threat because they encouraged people to stay away from the temples, and they didn't make sacrifices to the temple gods, which was a way of collecting taxes. The Jews had made their peace with Rome. So whatever the Jews took in their synagogues, a portion of that was given to the Romans. They paid for protection. The Christians did not. And so every so often, an emperor would raise up and say, we got to get these Christians out of the middle of us. They are doing no good thing. So you've got Domitian in 81 to 96. You've got Trajan from 98 to 117. You've got Diocletian, the last emperor before Constantine, who was perhaps the most brutal of the persecutors of Christians. So when Constantine took over, you've got to understand that that was a true liberating moment for the Christian community. They were subject to all kinds of brutal persecutions. I want to say one thing about Christian martyrdom that helped to build the church, and that is that unlike the martyrdom we see today, especially in the radical Islamic world, martyrdom among Christians did not end in a bunch of Christians saying, we're going to get even with these Romans who are killing us and hurting us. It didn't end in war. They used Christ as their example, who came back and did not go to war against Pilate, did not raise his sword against Herod. Jesus came back breathing grace and peace. And so it was with the example of Christian martyrs. They might be killed for refusing to do anything other than pledge their allegiance to Christ. And of course, the thing that they were saying that got them in so much trouble is a 3-word phrase. Christ is Kyrie. Christ is Lord. We sing it every Sunday. Kyrie, Lord, have mercy. Yeah. Christ is Lord. No, Caesar is Lord. And if you're not willing to say it, we're going to cut out your tongue. There were a number of martyrs, and this is sort of the beginning of the intellectual side, if you will, of the Christian church. These philosophers, Justin Martyr, this is Origen of Alexandria and Irenaeus of Lyon. They are living in the 2nd century, and they're writing some of the most important apologetics, the apologies, the why Christians should be welcomed into polite society, why Christians are good citizens, period. And these people argued that Christians make great citizens if you just leave them alone. Two of the historians that we know who are outside of the Bible, a man named Pliny and a man named Tacitus. These were advisors to early Roman emperors, early in the 100, 200 range. Both of them observed that what Christians are doing that is so popular among the people is they're taking care of the poor. They're taking care so there are no poor on the streets, so that people are fed. We no longer have a homelessness problem in Rome because the Christians are taking care of the homeless, and they're feeding those widows and children who otherwise have to beg on the streets. Now they get fed once a day by the Christian church. And Pliny and Tacitus try to argue with their emperors and say, we should be doing a better job of that. If we want the Roman Empire to last, we got to take care of our people, at least as well as the Christians do. They didn't. They didn't. They were too interested in their own wealth, in their own ability to thrive and prosper. And so these were some of the earliest voices arguing for including Christians in the in the civilized world, if you will. Tertullian wrote in the 2nd century, and you can see that Tertullian is already talking about God in Trinity long before Nicaea has ever come along. Tertullian says we worship unity in Trinity and Trinity in unity, neither confounding the person nor dividing the substance. There is one person of the Father, one persona of the Father, another of the Son, and another of the Holy Ghost. But the Godhead of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost is all one. The glory equal, the majesty co-eternal.
That's
And-
awesome.
Yeah.
I never heard that one before.
Yeah. Long before Constantine. Tertullian is arguing this. Yeah. Tertullian is also telling all Christians, don't go to the shows. Don't go to the Colosseum. Okay? He didn't mean Broadway. Don't, but the Romans called them the shows. And he said, it's all based on blood, even if it's not Christian blood. It's gladiators fighting each other. It's lions running around. You should not be going there, okay? Really. Turn off your TV sets. Was what Tertullian was saying. And tried to get Christians to live a different way.
Why isn't he more famous?
Yeah.
Why isn't he more famous?
Right.
I have a book of his complete works, but I'll tell you,
He
you know, again, you should know this about me already. I sort of take the path less trod.
Yeah.
The man who taught patristics at Princeton was 94 years old. Georges Florovsky escaped from Russia in 1919.
Wow.
He taught until his dying day when he was 97 years old. And if you ever got invited to his dormitory, it was full of lit candles, and we all thought the man was going to burn up. Because he had so many friends and saints that he was trying to remember. So his place was full of candles. All of us wanted to go in there and just use a fire extinguisher for his own safety.
That's why students are not allowed to have candles in dorms anymore.
It is. It is. But who's going to tell a 94-year-old, you can't have candles? But he taught
was a very
patristics.
visionary.
Yeah, he taught patristics, and so there were only 7 of us in his class, and so that was a rare privilege to be in his class. Yeah,
That's awesome.
along with ancient orthodoxy came ancient unorthodoxy. A man named Marcion of Sinope was, we consider him to be the first heretic. He arrived in Rome in 144 AD. He had been part of Bar Kokhba's revolt, and he was one who scattered and decided to go to Rome. Marcion did what Thomas Jefferson did. He took the Gospel of Luke and he edited out the parts he didn't like, and he had his own version of the Gospel of Luke that he thought was all the church needed. So he thought that with his edited version of Luke's Gospel and 9 letters of Paul, a 10th letter that is missing. We don't know where it is, but Marcion refers to the letter to Laodicea. We don't, it's lost to history. But he thought that's all the church needed. And most importantly, he wanted to get rid of the Old Testament. He said the Old Testament is not what Jesus teaches. And the Old Testament God is not the God that Jesus taught. The Old Testament God was an inferior God who didn't accomplish what he wanted to, and he made the world, and the world soon became evil because that God was evil.
Huh.
And therefore, we should throw out the Old Testament and only worship the God of Jesus, who is a new God, the God of love. Now, that was Marcion. Eventually, Marcion would be renounced as a heretic. This is 144 AD, the church had no power and didn't want to exercise it anyway. So Marcion was never burned at the stake or anything like that. He just was kind of tossed out of the local churches, and he started a church of his own. And actually, I want to say shortly after Muhammad started his work in the Middle East, the Church of Marcion was more popular than the Christian church, the Orthodox Christian church. But it died away about the 7th century, but it still sort of rears its head along with the ideas of Gnosticism that were brewing at the same time. The Gnostics and Marcion, I think in part, believed that when Christ was on the cross, he wasn't a real person. He wasn't a real body. He was a shell. And so what the Romans killed was just the shell. The real Jesus had already left the body and was already out there teaching in the Spirit. And so the crucifixion was not real because all flesh is evil. Everything created is evil. And there are still remnants of that around in our world today. There's a sense that Mormonism is largely a Gnostic faith. They don't believe in God the Father of Jesus Christ. Mormons believe that there was a father and a mother, and that our goal as human beings is to become like God, and that all of us can become like God. It's not to imitate Christ, it's to incorporate our godliness. And so that's why only the oldest people get to be the heads of the Mormon church, because you got to live a long time to get that close to God. And only men can do that. Although I think the Mormons are going to change their tune before too long. They've always been adept at changing their tune. But it is a form of Gnosticism. Rodney Stark thinks that the growth of the church, he explains it mathematically. He wants to start in the year 40 and say there were 1,000 Christians. Okay, the book of Acts says Peter baptized 5,000. And Stark says, okay, let's concede, maybe that's a little exaggerated, maybe. So he wants to start at a more reasonable number. He starts at 1,000. We do know that Luke will talk about sending out 72 disciples, 2 by 2, when they go out on their mission. We think that Luke, by saying 2 by 2, he's invoking Noah. And what does 2 by 2 mean to Noah?
A male and a female.
1 male, 1 female.
Oh.
Yeah. Luke's implying that for us. He's saying, yeah, when he sends out disciples to do the mission, he sends them out as male and female.
Interesting.
72. Yeah, side by side. Everybody's protected. Everybody's safe. So, 72, if you start with a round number of 72, I said before, the 12 disciples, you count them up in 4 Gospels, you end up at 17. So 1,000 is a reasonable number. He says if you understand the size of the population at the time, that number would have been about 1,000th of 1% were Christians in the year 40. If there is a rate of growth of 40% every decade, there's 1,400 by 50 AD, which doesn't change anything. But by 100 AD, that's 100th of a percent. By 150, it's 1/700th of a percent. By 200, it's 36 hundredths of a percent. By 250, it's 1.9%. By 300, it's 10.5%. And by 350, it's 56.5%. We know from Roman records that the Roman Empire was a little over 60 million at 350 AD. And so 56.5% would be a little more than half, and that's again, Constantine thinks that almost half of the Roman Empire in 325 is Christian. So by 350, 25 years later, there's more than half that are Christian. So that doesn't require any great, massive baptism of huge numbers of people at one time. That's just slow and steady growth. This is what, my banker's been trying to get me to do with my savings forever. Did I listen?
How does that equate then with the Arab populations?
With the Arab population, it's very hard to know Arab populations, okay? Arab people do not believe in census. And that was true of the Israelites as well. Arab people to this day, when they do a census, they use a round number. Whatever number they come up with, they round it. They say, okay, there's 4 million living in Saudi Arabia. And then they sign it, God only knows. Allah alone knows. Because if you think you know, you've taken on the role of God. Yeah, if you think you know how many people are living in Lansing, you're treading on ground that only God knows. Interesting idea. Yeah, Jews do the same thing. They sign their censuses. God only knows. Yep.
Is that why they're dispersing them throughout the world?
The Jews, you mean?
No.
No.
Arabs.
Arabs. They're dispersing them for many, many reasons. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, Muhammad had no qualms about converting people to Islam at the point of a sword. That was expected. I don't think Jesus ever taught that, but Christians certainly practiced it back in medieval times. And in some ways today, churches in Norway and Sweden are completely empty. But their entire support comes from the government. They get government subsidies to keep the churches running. So they don't have stewardship campaigns because the government pays. So so you're, in some of these countries, you're required to get baptized so the government can have you on the tax rolls.
In Norway and Sweden?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I have relatives in both places. My Norwegian relatives, when they came and visit me here years and years ago, but they came to church, it's like, my God, what is this? This is church?
Oh my.
I've never seen anything like it. So,
It's got people in it.
yeah. Yeah. It was a pretty fun thing to watch. Yeah. So there's Constantine. That's his statue in Rome. He became emperor in 306, declared himself a Christian in 312, called together the Nicene Council in 325, was crowned in Constantinople 329 while wearing the symbols of Apollo, the sun god, and he wasn't baptized until just before his death in 337. Constantine was of the belief that you got baptized after you committed all the sins you could possibly commit. And now I'll be baptized.
It's convenient.
Yeah.
As long as you live long enough.
Right. At one point I thought that was a pretty good idea. Yeah. So, yeah, but it's important to note that, we think of him as the Christian emperor, but no, when he was crowned, he wore all the symbolism of Apollo. He was the direct descendant of the sun god, and he wasn't that great of a Christian. He had a vision during a battle in 312, and his vision or his dream, he saw angels with a cross coming down from heaven to bestow blessings upon him. So he had, according to the legend, and all we have is a legend, Constantine had all his soldiers paint a cross on their shields. And he had their swords made with this handle. So the swords looked like an inverted cross. Okay? And lo and behold, they won the battle. And that was all that Constantine needed. They won the battle. God was with me. So, 312, he makes Christianity to be a legal religion in Rome. He no doubt was influenced by his mother, Helena. Helena was a Christian long before Constantine became the emperor. You can see, even in the mosaics, you know, they made Constantine out to be a Christian with a Christian crown, a cross on his crown. Something that is not historical. But the artist took license and made him that way. Helena was known to be the first pilgrim, the first Christian pilgrim. She worshipped in a small Christian community in Rome, and after her son made it legal, she took a trip to the Holy Land with some of her son's bodyguards. And they went so she could walk the steps that Jesus walked. She was the first one that we know of who did that in Jerusalem. And what she found there, what she claims to have found there, and legend has it, she found some slivers of wood that are the true cross, the cross on which Jesus was crucified. And during the Middle Ages, pieces of that cross were distributed to about 1,000 different churches across Europe as a relic to be prized. And if you wanted to make an oath, you know, Henry VIII would say, "Here, you know, pledge your oath on this piece of the true cross. You know, you're either going to keep your oath or you're going to die in hell." You know, but that's how those pieces of the true cross were used. As soon as it was made legal, there were other Christians, St. Anthony, Paul of Thebes, notably a couple of people, who decided to go back out into the desert. You know, if the empire is going to be the new home of Christianity, we're going to go out into the desert and try to find God there. This is the earliest known monastery. It is St. Catherine's, found at the base of Mount Sinai, built in about the 5th century. And I'm told if you want to go there, you better be in really good shape, because it is very difficult to get to. A guy by the name of Simon Stylites, in around 450 AD, decided that, you know, since he couldn't go to the desert, he'd bring the desert into the city. And Simon and some of his followers would set up these columns in the middle of the city, and they would live on the top of this big column. I mean, yes, they lived there. They had a pulley system to get food up to them. They had this little thing in the background where they could fall asleep without falling off. I hate to even speculate how they went to the bathroom.
Exactly.
But the people lived up there. This is their rebellion against the Church of the Empire. And this is, this is now, official icon from the 12th century of the Orthodox Church. Jesus, it's called Christ Pantocrator, Christ, creator of the universe. Jesus is holding the Alpha and the Omega, Scripture, the beginning and the end of the Greek alphabet. He's offering the three-part blessing of the Orthodox Church. And this is sort of the official portrait, if you will, of Jesus. This is a painting by John Biggers in the 1950s called The Upper Room. And it shows three women holding the church on their shoulders. Is it sunset for the church or is it dawn? Here's the ladder of angels ascending and descending, Jacob's ladder, off to the side, and God's church is carried on the shoulder of ordinary people. Like Moses, when we look at this painting, we see God's backside. We see the glory of God from behind. And that is enough glory for Moses. And John Biggers thinks it ought to be enough glory for us. Yeah. Interesting painting. Oh yeah. And here we go. Here, I just included these. These are the early churches, after they became bureaucratic, they built early churches like temples, and they columns and center space. The thing that was different in Roman temples, in the middle of the basilica, there was a statue, Athena, Apollo, whoever. And you laid your gifts at the feet of the statue, and then you left. Or you went over to one of the side rooms to purchase some stuff that that the temple had for sale, including people. But the center of it was empty, except for the great statue, gilded, full of gold and riches and so forth. The Christian church filled the center part with people. And it no longer was an empty space. It was full space. People were praying. People were singing. People were talking. It was a noisy place to go into these early Christian churches that were built like temples. After the Reformation, Protestant churches said, we're not going to build basilicas anymore. Well, there's always been exceptions. Kirk of the Hills. There's always been exceptions, but this is a church in Missouri, and yeah, you're getting on the ark every Sunday. This is a church in Florida. I hope it's still standing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should see the boat. In 1980, all Lutheran churches in America, LCA churches, had to build their churches like boats. This is one of the largest Presbyterian churches in South Korea. Again, you can see the boat. It looks like they're ready to build a second boat right here. And this is the largest Presbyterian church in the world. Anybody know where it is?
Looks like that.
Africa.
Yeah. It's in Malawi. There are more Presbyterians in Malawi than in the United States.
Really?
Yep. Yep. 12 million.
Wow.
Malawi is only a country of about 25 million. 12 million of our Presbyterians.
Wow.
The Christian church in the southern hemisphere, mark my words, the next pope is going to be African. The largest population of Christians in the world are in the African continent. Second largest, South America. Third largest, North America. Fourth largest, Asia and Oceania. The smallest group are in Europe. I've had a couple of Malawans when I was in Okemos who had come to church in Okemos. And, because Michigan State had a few students, and their mothers would bring them to church with them. And the mothers would hand me a sheet of paper after they'd been to church. And every week, I had to fill out the form and sign it so she could send it back to her minister in Malawi. And it said, you know, did she participate in the prayers? Did she give money to the church? Did she exhibit upstanding moral behavior? I mean, I had to testify to all of that and sign it for them. But that's you know, that's part of the discipline of the church in Malawi. You know, this is what you do. This is how you show who you are. But yeah, the church, the global South is where the church is growing, and it's growing faster than the 40% that Stark says the church grew at in its first 350, 400 years. The church is growing faster than that in the global South, in South America, and parts of Oceania and Africa. So, I wanted to take, you know, Ken asked the question, what happened to women in the church? And I want to make sure I take that in this period of time to say, you know, women were very active in the first 100, 200 years of the church life. But when the church became bureaucratic, you know, that's number one. Women got left behind. The council at Nicaea, when Constantine gathered up all the bishops, they were all men. Even though, you know, like I said, I think Phoebe was a bishop, but she wouldn't have been around by 325. But I think that was one thing. And the second thing was the movement that happened in the early Middle Ages, which was the imitation of Christ. And the priests and the leaders in the church started to imitate that you must be like Christ. And, you know, and if you're a woman, I'm sorry, you can only get so far, because Christ came as a man. And so, you know, men can be like Christ better than women, which I highly dispute.
So ridiculous.
But that became, you know, one of the marks for the medieval church, and women got thrown off to the side. You know, they didn't disappear. You know, there were groups of women followers. I mean, St. Francis, he was top of the line imitators of Christ. That's what he was. But his sister Clare started the Little Sisters of the Poor, and so, you know, she found a place for women, even though it wasn't in the mainstream of the Roman Catholic Church. The poor Little Sisters of the Poor are still being set upon here in the United States by the Biden administration. Joe keeps trying to get them to pay for contraception, even though the Little Sisters of the Poor say, we don't have anybody here who practices sex. But our governments had them in court off and on for 12 years. So.
Referring back to one of your previous slides, the very last big stand for the Jewish people.
Yes.
Keep going. Yep.
Oh, Beitar?
Yes. I had never heard of that before. That's it.
Simon Bar Kokhba.
Yeah. Regarding that, why is that? I'm asking, maybe Prince, why do I not know of this?
Yeah.
You weren't paying attention during that time.
It's just, is that something that is
It's
really
another,
out there?
one of my points is, I think this is part of history that has been neglected in our public education. I don't know of any college courses. They offer a course on on the Jewish-Roman War, which, you know, to me would be highly relevant, especially where we are in the world today. But no, you know, you'd be taught this history in a Jewish seminary. It's barely taught in Christian seminaries. I mean, I signed on for a doctoral seminar, and then the professor let me in, so that I studied all this, and I studied from original documents, which was pretty fascinating. You know, Princeton has some of those documents, but we don't really teach this. And I don't know why, you know, in some ways the church is a little hesitant about Bar Kokhba, because he was lifted up. I mean, Marcion thought Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. That's why he was following him. He thought Bar Kokhba was the second coming of Jesus. And then he got killed. So Marcion went to Rome. Oops, back the wrong horse. So yeah, but yeah, there were roughly about 25 messianic figures who showed up in and around Jerusalem between 100 BC and 132 AD. 25 different ones. A man known as the Egyptian went up on the hill of Golgotha. He promised the people there, he said, I will stand here, the Romans will try to kill me and they won't be able to kill me. And he stood on that hill and the Romans killed him. Wasn't a very good strategy.
No.
No. No. But again, you know, this, you know, it's not, while it is unusual history, I mean, you know, Native Americans, you know, they went up to the forts in South Dakota and said, you know, we've had a vision and, you know, white bullets will not kill us. And the white bullets did kill them. You know, there's a, yeah. Again, one of the themes of the New Testament, be careful of false prophets. Be careful of false prophets. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, the Jewish saying around 100 AD was, if you hear someone say the Messiah is coming, he will be here at noon, finish planting your field, go home, clean up, have your dinner, and then go see if the Messiah came. The idea that you don't rush off. You go about your daily work. And if the Messiah is there, he'll still be there.
Aren't we warned that no one knows the date and time?
We are warned that over and over and over and over and over. Yes. Jesus says, I don't know the time. Only the Father knows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, we are warned again and again and again. And again and again and again, we don't always listen. Yeah. Well, I hope you find this history is interesting to you. And I hope I gave you stuff that you've never seen before.
Right.
And,
Thank you so much.
yeah, my
for sharing
pleasure.
your
Really.
knowledge.
It's my